Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to have an overall discussion about the state of healers in 9.1. And with this video, this is the first and foremost discussion video. I want to hear your opinions on multiple things, including are the changes in 9.1 are going to be big enough to dethrone your best healer in 9.05. Maybe there's going to be an underdog emerging in that Mythic Plus and raid scene. Before watching this video, I highly advise you to check out my last two videos in terms of Mythic Plus healers and raid healers, in terms of my rankings and my predictions. Basically assuming you've seen those videos and you know what's going on in terms of healer changes. And now we're going to talk about the overall feel and state of healers in the new patch in Shadowlands. Let's go and get started. So I have a bunch of metrics from 9.05 in terms of, again, this is real player information. None of this is biased. This is based on how many players are playing each class, how well they're performing, and a lot of the times, if there's a lot of players playing a certain class, there's a reason for that. And we have a bunch of metrics here, both for Mythic Plus, both for raiding, and honestly, the changes that happen to healers in Shadowlands, if you look at the amount of changes, there's a lot of text here to read through. So how is the buffs to Mistweaver going to impact them? How is the nerfs going to impact Holy Paladin in both raids and Mythic Plus? We're going to talk about all of this, but before I'm going to go into that section of the video, I want to have a little disclaimer or talk about meta and chasing meta and playing the best of the best all the time. Now, I've been doing these videos for a long time in terms of creating these, meta content, and a lot of the times I'll be providing a disclaimer, hey, you don't need to play these best classes if you're not doing high end. I think a lot of people know that, but based on the explosion of these tier list videos, especially in Shadowlands, there is a human nature component to, hey, I need any advantage I can get. And this is not specific to World of Warcraft. This is actually evident in every single game out there, especially multiplayer games, where, hey, I want to have an advantage by playing a good class or the best from the very start, even if I don't need that advantage in the content that I'm doing. Prime example is Classic. Prime example is TBC, where content is comparable to like looking for raid content. But look how many people will play meta classes. Look how many people will use logs and compare logs and things like that to content where it doesn't really matter and you can do it with pretty much any raid composition. People will still optimize it. It is human nature to have an advantage in anything that they're trying to achieve. So you're always going to have a split between people who will follow the meta and people who will basically play a class that gives them the most joy. You're also going to have people who are going to want to play a healer that's perceived to be good, but they also take into how fun the class is. So they use multiple different kind of evaluations to pick their main for a new patch. So should you follow the meta? Should you play the best healer? Honestly, it's based on who you are as a person. Do you care about having advantage? Do you care about class being fun? Or do you take a combination of class being fun plus being perceived to be a good spec? And I'm not here to judge people based on which type of players they are. You're here paying money, paying a monthly subscription to play a game. You can do whatever you want. My only rule in terms of following the meta is that if you do end up playing a certain class that you really don't like, but you end up playing it because it is perceived to be really good, I think you are kind of going against the whole point of paying money to play a game and have fun. But that's just only my advice. And now let's go and have a look at the data from 9.05 and see how this might change in 9.1. You'll see this and you might be like, okay, this is the 75 percentile, Castle Natri and Mythic. This is HPS logs, and you might be like, okay, Resto Druid is doing top HPS, therefore it is the best. And you're missing a lot of information in order to make this determination. In World of Warcraft, for a long time, there's been a separation between pure HPS healers, and these are HPS healers or healers that provide a lot of healing, but they might not have passive DPS, or they might, again, when I say passive DPS, I'm talking about DPS, or a healer that can do DPS without sacrificing healing, and there's very few people that can do that. Holy Paladin, Discipline Priest, and to some extent Mistweaver Monk with Fist Weaving are the only healers that can really provide healing and damage at the same time without losing one or the other. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of times where you can opt into a more DPS oriented playstyle, but for the sake of simplicity, let's assume Mistweaver, Holy Paladin, and Discipline Priest are all the healers that can provide passive damage. And you can see here the damage logs here. They're pretty much the top healers anyways most of the time because, again, they don't have to sacrifice healing. Now, Holy Paladin is by a mile the top DPS, but they're getting like a 15%, or Venti Holy Paladin is getting a 15% damage nerf, which again, that damage nerf is not really going to do too much because look how far ahead they are. Again, these logs, you have to take them with a pinch of salt because they are in raids and a lot of the times people might be memeing with those. So they're the only indication that I can show you at this point, because this is the only point of data that's available, but this is not a best representation. So generally speaking, you have those pure HPS healers, and then you have those utility healers. Pure HPS healer, if you go to 99 percentile, you can see that Resto Druid is actually pumping. They received multiple points of buffs throughout 9.05. All of a sudden, they're like, you know, pure HPS healer. They don't really have passive DPS. They don't really have damage reduction cooldowns. Damage reduction cooldown is another thing that's separating healers at this point. And it's important to note that anything that's going to prevent damage, a lot of the times, is better than pure HPS healing cooldown. If you can prevent all the damage, it's better than healing that damage up. Especially when there's going to be certain mechanics that are just going to close to one-shot you. Like, for example, in Sardinatus with Blood Price and things like that. So you have to have Spirit Shell, you have to have damage reduction in those situations, because you just lift it up in the air. And now what's happening in 9.1? You basically going to have Resto Druid still being extremely high in HPS, because again, nothing is really changing for them. You could also argue that Resto Druid, out of the underdogs, they're doing pretty well in 9.1, because Sanctum of Domination has a lot of this rot type of healer profile where they're slowly taking damage and your HOTS are going to heal pretty well. Also the fact that there is a decent amount of movement, you could say that Resto Druid, if there is an underdog healer that could kind of make it into the meta, is a possibility Resto Druid might be included in some of the world first skills, which is really fun to see. Out of other pure HPS healers, Holy Priest is one of those. But Holy Priest is also receiving some Symbol of Hope changes in 9.1 to make them more utility based. And based on the interview with Morgan Day, they really kind of pushed Symbol of Hope as being as the defining factor of the class, which I don't see it yet, especially in Pug situations. I don't see Symbol of Hope being even a thing in Pugs. There's not going to be a lot of kind of organization. And a lot of people will probably put Mistweaver in this pure HPS healer because they have two different playstyles. You have your range Mistweaver where you don't provide damage, and that is your pure HPS healer because you don't have a damage reduction cooldown. But there's also a fist weaving build where you can deal damage. So this is why Mistweaver is in this weird spot. Ranged, fist weaving, which one's better? I definitely feel in 9.1, fist weaving is going to have a direct advantage because they are buffing the damage of Mistweaver, which in turn is going to buff one of the most popular legendaries, and that is Ancient Teachings of the Monastery. So when looking at this data, it actually is going to be really interesting to say that your Restoration Shaman, Holy Paladin, Discipline Priest, these are the healers. These are the healers that are actually the most popular or considered to be the meta in 9.05. And they're probably going to be the meta in 9.1. Based on this chart, these have the lowest HPS. So this is why looking at HPS is not a good defining factor. Now, if you're a type of healer who's approaching heroic content or entry-level mythic content, and there needs to be a certain amount of healing officer to look at these logs and say like, hey, okay, your healing is not that good, but you're providing tons of damage, you're providing tons of utility. A lot of the times in lower end guilds, people don't really care about, oh hey, I provide Spirit Link, oh hey, I provide Devo Aura or Aura Master as a Holy Paladin. They might not look at those things and they'll be like, hey, if you top healing meters, you're the best healer. So if you're in that type of a guild, where you just care about HPS, I think there's two clear options in terms of what healer you should be playing in 9.1, and that is Restoration Druid and Mistweaver Monk. Mistweaver Monk is going to get significant changes in terms of how Revival is going to be impacted by Mastery. It's going to be working with Mastery, which has really nice synergy with things like pressing Essence Font, getting Essence Font hot on people, pressing Revival, and Revival is going to double proc Mastery on people who have your Essence Font hot, which in turn works really well with things like Kyrian that gives you a huge mastery bonus, and things like Bondo's Brew from Necrolord. Now you have synergy with Revival, making it a really strong, pure throughput healing cooldown. On top of the fact that I talked about Mistweavers getting buffs in 9.1 in terms of damage, which is going to increase their healing through fist weaving. So, it is not crazy for me to say that Mistweaver Monk and Resto Druid are probably going to be your best throughput healers in 9.1, and if you like these big numbers, these healers are gonna provide those big numbers, and you're probably gonna top healing meters, and people are gonna be like, oh hey, you're playing really well. But at the same time, if you're in a hardcore mythic raiding guild that is looking to optimize every single bit of their healer, including damage reduction, or cooldowns and things like that, I don't know if you're gonna shift away from I don't think you're gonna shift away from the big three, the trifecta of healers, the Resto Shaman, the Holy Paladin, the Discipline Priest. I know Discipline Priest is getting spiritual nerfs, but honestly the new Kyrian kind of build is looking fun. Keep in mind that the new Kyrian build requires Mechanical Straight, which is going to be unlocked a couple of weeks after, so that's also a consideration in terms of, do you need to be the most optimal in the first couple of weeks. That's also a thing to consider. I do think that Resto Druid could actually come into the meta for certain classes or certain fights because of the rot damage profile and the movement. And honestly, I do expect some changes for Mistweaver. Maybe during the Heroic Mythic Week, there's going to be a certain point where they're going to say, oh hey, we're going to improve or increase Mistweaver damage. And maybe nerf the Fistwing Legendary, because the Fistwing Legendary is scaling too well with the Mistweaver damage. I don't think Blizzard wants you to lock into a single Legendary. Like, the way that it's looking for Mistweaver is that you're just going to go with the Fistwing Legendary because the extra damage increase indirectly buffs the legendary and you're kind of locked into that legendary. In the same way that Holy Priests are locked into Flash Concentration. I'm not sure if that is the best design or game design for those classes, because what's happening in the next expansion? People might be like so used to those kind of aspects. Blizzard is probably going to be expected to include them as like talents or something like that. Might not be a bad thing, but that is my general consensus on raiding. I don't think the meta is going to be heavily shifted. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of changes. I do think there's going to be certain underdog healers coming into 9.1. I've talked about Holy Paladin, but Holy Paladin, there's so many people have been talking about Holy Paladin in terms of the huge list of changes. Holy Paladin has probably been the best healer overall in 9.05, and it's still looking to be the best overall healer in 9.1. So many people have been talking about the fact that, oh hey, Crusaders, my talent is going to be nerfed and the whole playstyle is going to be different. The damage nerfs are going to be big, the gameplay is going to be so much different. Like, they're saying that Holy Paladin has received a rework, and in my honest opinion, in terms of the testing, the gameplay is almost identical. The Crusaders might change is not going to be that big, considering that you're going to get more secondary stats. The fact that you're probably going to be using more Infusion of Light procs, that's a good thing, because Infusion of Light was basically a concept of a class that was never used, which was just weird. You might have to use mana potions as a Holy Paladin because your mana is going to be a bit more difficult, but in terms of gameplay, it honestly feels exactly the same, but less powerful in terms of damage. In terms of healing throughput, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of changes. You, like I said, you might use the Infusion of Light a bit more, you might use a mana potion instead of an intellect potion, but the gameplay, you're still a melee healer, you're still pumping damage, you still have the same choice, and this is one of the questions that I get asked all the time. Venti or Kyrian? What should I play in 9.1? And my general answer is that, what are you playing right now? Why did you decide to play the Covenant that you're playing right now in 9.05? Because the same exact parameters are going to exist in 9.1. If you have an organized group, if you value Holy Paladin damage, Ventir is probably going to be the way to go. But if you're poking a lot and if you're not managing your cooldowns that well, Kyrian is far easier in those poke situations. It's the same kind of thing that's happening in 9.1. Like, there is a lot of changes that are happening to healers, but I don't think that's going to impact the meta, at least at this given point. I do see where Blizzard is coming out with these healer changes. They don't want Holy Paladin to be as far ahead of everyone else, and they're nerfing them. In my opinion, they were extremely cautious with the nerfs to Holy Paladin because they didn't want to over nerf them. They know that there's a lot of Holy Paladins out there, and they want to keep the player base pretty high. I think there is a high possibility that maybe during the Heroic or Mythic Week, Holy Paladin might receive further nerfs in terms of the damage. But you also have to argue that Holy Paladin has a really interesting playstyle with high risk, high reward. If you play Ashen Hallow, I know a bunch of Holy Paladins who swapped to Ashen Hallow in poke situations and they honestly could not play it. They were like borderline tears because it is so awkward to play in poke situations with a 4-minute cooldown that requires so much coordination, especially if you're approaching something like Grievous Mythic Plus weeks. So should this type of gameplay where you need an organized group, you need to have perfect gameplay, should this be rewarded or should this be nerfed? And I can see the Blizzard is trying to be very cautious with the nerfs to Holy Paladin because honestly the gameplay is kind of fun. Having this high risk, high reward is really interesting, but the whole community perception becomes so shifted when you see all of these high-end players only playing Holy Paladin and optimizing it and having this insane DPS, and people trying to replicate that in poke situations that are like, wow, this is not really working for me. And you can see this is how the meta works. People look at these 1% or players who are like top end. We're talking about hundreds of players. We're not talking maybe thousands of players who determine the meta for the rest of multiple millions of players. So this is why it's really skewed, and raiding or the state of healers in raid situations, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of shifting. I think your biz healer, your Holy Paladin is probably gonna fall down a little bit, but still going to be in a really good position. I think you're still gonna have the trifecta of Restoration, Shaman, Discipline, Priest. But I also think there is a chance of Resto Druid coming in on those rot, heavy movement fights. Maybe Mistweaver's gonna get some further buffs. Holy Priest getting some utility that is somewhat questionable. They're adding some conservative buffs to underperforming classes with possible hope of adding more tuning for Heroic and Mythic weeks, which probably is going to be the defining week in terms of are they going to shift the meta. I think you really have to wait for that Heroic Mythic week to really see which side or which way Blizzard is going to go. And this is really, really cool information because it provides you with a good overview of where community perception is. So this is the chart showing you, oh hey, there's a good amount of slice, or a big enough slice for Resto Druid, big enough slice for Holy Paladin, Priest, and Resto Shaman in these 15 keys. The exception to the rule is the Mistweaver, and Mistweaver is something that is really weird in my opinion. There's very few people who play Mistweaver. You can look at that in raid situations as well based on parses. The least played healer is going to be Mistweaver. The least played healer in Mythic Plus is also going to be Mistweaver. Kind of surprises me because in my opinion Mistweaver is actually, of fist weaving, is actually the most fun healer in the game right now. And this is based on trying it out in 9.1, trying it out in 9.05. I think it is an extremely fun healer that needs high representation. So you can see at the start of Shadowlands, you can see in Mythic Plus, the community perception in plus 15s, or the slices, are pretty good. You can play any healer, the community perception should be okay. Like, anyone who requires a Ventier Holy Paladin for a plus 15, you don't want to join that group anyways. You really just pass it up. But you can see also that the hierarchies you go, Holy Paladins just completely overtake. Like they're absolutely like dominating these really high keys. But you can also see that in a plus 20 or up to plus 20, Resto Shamans have also the highest slice. And this is one of the reasons that I talked about for a long time, that Resto Shaman is one of the best healers to pug your way to plus 20s because it has an interrupt, it has good on-demand healing, it has good utility. If you look at the overall data, I think Resto Shaman is probably one of the safest choices to pick both for raiding and Mythic Plus, and in terms of pug content, in terms of joining a guild, in terms of joining a proper Mythic Plus group, I think Resto Shaman is in a really good position. I think Holy Paladin is also in a really good position, but Holy Paladin requires, like, you need a proper group. Resto Shaman does not. At least in Mythic Plus content. In 9.1, you're going to be getting things like Tormented, which again, certain healers have more advantage. Like for example, Holy Paladin, Bob, Blessing of Protection is really strong on the Bleed Lieutenant, because the Bleed Lieutenant is really annoying with the healing reduction that it provides. And this is some of the data from 9.05 in terms of keys level 20 and up, and you can see Shaman and Holy Paladin are dominating. And I think the same thing is going to happen in 9.1, because I think there is not enough changing. Mistweaver is getting damage buffs, they're getting healing buffs, and I think Mistweaver is going to climb a little bit, but I don't think there's enough people to make the leap of going into Mistweaver. Like, Mistweaver's representation is so little that Mistweaver needs to be actually overpowered for people to make a swap to Mistweaver. They need to be OP for a tier, so people swap to them, and then they're like, oh hey, Mistweaver is actually a really fun healer, I'm gonna stick with this. So I don't think the current changes to Mistweaver are big enough for people to make that jump at this given point, which is honestly a little bit sad. I think the same thing is going to happen with Holy Paladin still going to be really strong. I think they are going to drop off a little bit because of damage nerfs. Again, the damage are not going to be felt that much, but I think Resto Shaman, the fact that they have so many legendaries that can provide so much DPS, your Deep Tremor legendary, you have the Ventier Covenant specific legendary that feels really good in terms of damage and healing. I think Resto Shamans are going to climb and be on par with Holy Paladin possibly. Maybe in the highest content in the world, Holy Paladin is still going to be dominating, but I think in pug situations, I think if you definitely want a pug and you want a healer that's going to have a good community perception in 9.1, it's probably going to be Resto Shaman. I think Discipline Priest is also going to climb because the Kyrian build, where you have your Boon of the Ascended, where you have your Covenant specific or Kyrian specific legendary plus mechanical straight. You can have Boon every 1 minute. It makes it so much more fun. Because I think Discipline Priest does lack that oh crap button, especially continuous single target healing. It can be really awkward. And it is possible that Discipline Priest might become the second most popular healer in Mythic Plus, because if you look at the pure DPS output and because of the new Tormented affix, the healing requirement is going to be lower with the exception of one Lieutenant. Discipline Priest and the new Kyrian build with 1 minute Boon of the Ascended provide pretty good damage, on top of the fact that PI might take this priest over the edge in terms of the pure DPS output that it can achieve But I still think it's relatively early days, depending whether this combo of the Covenant-specific Legendary and the Soulbind is still going to be relevant, or maybe it's going to be altered in the near future. But I have to say that I really enjoy what Holy Priest is right now. Flash Concentration has made Holy Priest one of the most relaxing healers to play in the game. Honestly, it is so simple. It is basically TBC or classic levels of gameplay, where you could break down the whole rotation into 2 spells if you really wanted to. I know there is a lot more kind of mastering in terms of your Covenant abilities or your soul binds, in terms of your resonant words, in terms of proccing your word spells in order to have more single target healing. I know there is, you know, mastering or more to Holy Priest than just 2 buttons. But anyone who could just pick up a healer could pick up a Holy Priest and just use those 2 buttons and have a lot of success. When you consider the amount of stress that you have to go through when you're playing Discipline Priest, it's so weird. You have this insanely complex healer, especially with your Kirin, especially with your Boon Descendant, being severely impacted by the amount of haste you have, how many Ascended Blasts you can have, how many Ascended Novas you can fit in. It can be really, really awkward, and you have to really pay attention to every single charge pack pull. And then you have a Holy Priest who's completely opposite and super chill. If you need a healer, if you're a beginner healer or someone who's looking for a healer that's gonna give you a really good performance, both in raid situations, both in Mythic Plus, in KSM level keys, or in really high keys, because I think there is going to be people who are going to be pushing really high keys as Holy Priests. Holy Priest is one of the clear options for that type of healer. And guys, I have nothing but good things to say about this. And Resto Druid, I think Resto Druid is going to be sitting in a similar position. They're not getting a whole lot of changes in Mythic Plus. They're not getting a whole lot of changes in raiding. There is some legendaries that are going to be really nice for them. The Nightfall legendary. But generally speaking, Resto Druid, really good overall HPS healing. They have good versatility in terms of, you know, doing damage, shifting to Boomkin form, or maybe even Feral Affinity. It'll be interesting to see. And I feel that Restoration Druid is a great overall healer, provides amazing single target healing, great overall HPS, and has good utility. But at the same time, the community perception is not that great for Resto Druids. They're not viewed as part of the meta. And I think that's also partly to do with the fact, are Boomkins going to be meta in 9.1? Are you going to have similar classes that provide the same utility? And if not, Druid could have a better spot. And there's a lot of people trying out these Necrolord builds, and I think there could be a little surprise in the future. Maybe there's going to be some new build emerging out of nowhere, so keep your ear to the ground in terms of Resto Druid. At the end of the day, you don't need to play any of these healers to have a good time. I really genuinely feel that these charts here are not a good representation of what you can achieve. Like, for example, I think in 9.1 you can play a Mistweaver and have a really good time and push really high keys. Like, I think their pure throughput is really nice. I think they do lack a bit of damage and things like that. But, like, look at this chart. You might think that Mistweaver can't even do a plus 10 or something based on this. And that is so false. I think the healer balance in Mythic Plus in 9.1 is going to be a lot closer. I think you'll have really good time with any healing spec right now. Even in high-end content. Community perceptions are a different thing. Like, if you're looking for just community perception, if you're someone who's looking to pug really high-end keys, like for example, if you're pugging plus 20s right now, there is a high chance that people are going to be looking for that meta, because that's just the way people are, especially at the start of a new patch where people are looking to get any advantage they can get. So they're going to be looking to invite classes that are perceived to be good. But I still think the biggest mistake you can make as a player, or anyone playing this game, is picking a class that you really don't like and only playing it because it is perceived to be good or meta or amazing. Because at the end of the day, if you don't like a class, you're not going to stick with it. You're not going to enjoy the game. You're actually paying money per month to play this game. So I do feel that there is going to be a lot of people who are going to be making their choice on mains based on fun and viability. And I can see where people are coming from. But if you're just making your choice based on whether the healer is good or bad, even if you hate them, that's not a good way to approach the game, at least in my opinion. And I really do enjoy making these kind of state of healers videos, looking at how each healer is performing, looking where the community perception is shifting. I don't think anything is going to change in 9.1, or I don't think there's a lot of things that are going to change, but I can see where Blizzard is coming with these changes. They're making conservative nerfs to healers that are overperforming. They're making conservative buffs to healers that they feel are not perceived to be as good, with the hopes of making the last tuning during the heroic mythic raid weeks based on where they see the numbers heading. So I think there's still going to be some surprises happening when 9.1 launches in terms of what's happening, which makes picking your main really hard because I'm leaning towards Mistweaver Monk, but I'm also not sure if Blizzard is going to buff them a bit further and make them a bit more optimal in raid and Mythic Plus situations. But guys, again, let me know how you feel about this insanely long video. This is a discussion video. How do you feel about the meta? How do you feel about the meta not changing? Are you someone who's making their main decision based on fun or maybe based on viability? What type of player are you? Let me know, guys, and I'll see you in my next video.